Sunday, October 2nd. And it's basically the fifth week of the Wisdom Road journey since I left San Diego. I'm about 25 miles to the west of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I spent the last week, a terribly interesting week, in really what is the heart of farm country in the Midwest and upper Midwest. As you get further north, farming gets tougher and tougher, but this is still real farm country as far as the eye can see in every direction for tens of miles, for hours of driving. It's corn, soybeans, silos, small farms, cattle, green pastures, and now brown pastures with the fall, small towns. And I really, this week has pointed up an incredible conjunction, I think, or intersection of people's values and what they value with the lifestyle here, but also the realities of the economics of farming in America. Try to summarize it really quickly. When a lot of the folks I've met, when they were growing up, they and their parents, these were family farms. People would farm a section, maybe up to 1,000 acres would be a good-sized family farm, and the parents and all the kids participated, and they had some hired hands that would come in and help during the summer and during harvest time and all that. And that radically changed with mechanization in the, probably starting in the 70s. Today, remarkably, I met a family. I sat down and had dinner with them. There are 8 of them, 8 or 9. There's a dad and sons and a brother and nephew, but basically 8 or 9 of them, with no hired labor, are farming 8 or 9,000 acres. Big combines, expensive equipment, that sort of thing. Land prices have gone through the roof, and the cost of running an operation have gone through the roof. It's just not something you can start up as a family business any longer. And so what that meant is that there are just a whole lot less folks involved in farming, even though the land is more productive than it ever has been. Most of the farms now are owned and operated by very large conglomerates. One of those conglomerates are actually the religious Hutterite colonies that gather their resources together and can afford to buy land and operate a lot of land. And then there are big corporations that run farming operations essentially from Canada all the way to Mexico through the central United States. As one gentleman put it, these communities out here are going to have to make a choice. They essentially are making a choice. Are we going to have kids in schools, or are we going to have the Monsantos of the world running farming in America? You just can't have both. So throughout this whole area, towns have shrunk, schools have closed or consolidated, churches don't have anybody going to them any longer. They stand empty. And that's really been the case since the farm crisis in certainly the 1980s and ever since. So that's sort of been the state of play for decades. And I then spent most of the week in a town that decided to do something about it. The town of Huron, which used to be the end of the railroad line when the railroads were first built here in the 19th century, was a fairly sort of a central place where a lot of people brought their grain and their cattle and that sort of thing. And it was a fairly thriving town until the 70s or 80s. And then it started to go into decline until the 2000s when, as one person said, the town finally had to do a real gut check and decide they were going to do something different. So it's a really long story, but they lost all sorts of employment opportunities and businesses in the town. The Hutterite colonies actually started up a turkey processing plant. They kill something like 20,000 turkeys a day at this plant. But of course, in order to do that, they needed a labor force, which didn't exist here. Another long story, they ended up bringing in a very large number of people from refugee camps in Thailand, the Karen, that's K-A-R-E-N, but pronounced Karen ethnic minority, which had been persecuted and gone through the ethnic cleansing that we hear about a lot about the Rohingya now in Myanmar and Burma. the Burmese military essentially killing off ethnic minorities there. And the Karen had been living in these refugee camps in Thailand for as many as 20 years. Were desperate for some kind of relief and some other kind of work. And so they brought over families, and they were happy to have the jobs, happy to have the work. And that community has really thrived. The white community had concerns at first. They thought, oh, you know, it's going to bring more crime, and they were wary of having people that didn't look like them. One of the biggest changes that they made in terms of making sure this model worked was the superintendent of schools reorganized the schools so that white people couldn't choose, you know, we're all going to go to that school and keep the immigrants, or the new Americans as they call them, in another school. They reorganized so that all the schools were grade level schools. So all the kindergarten to third graders go to the same school, all the fourth and fifth graders, the middle schoolers, the high schools, all go to the same school together. I'll be writing about this a lot, but it's been a real success. There's now another meat processing plant, a jerky processing plant that actually has hired mostly Hispanic folks from Mexico and across Central America. And these two groups of new Americans now represent 60% of all the students in the schools. There are still a few people who send their kids to schools in the adjacent districts, but the vast majority of people report and tell me that this has really brought the community together. And the kids now are all growing up together, and kids, when they grow up together like that, don't necessarily see color like the adults do. The homecoming king and queen this year at the high school were both Karen. The soccer team at the high school, which I went and saw their playoff game, is #1 seed in the entire state, and the entire team is made up of Hispanic and Karen kids. And there's huge pride about all of this in the community. New businesses have come in, population has rebounded, housing prices, which had been down to something like 40 cents on the dollar, have now rebounded, and there's new home building. So just about everything it's gone in the right direction. And again, I'll be writing more about this, so I won't use all the stories now. But there was one that is so poignant. Again, the white community had been worried that, oh, you know, things are going to happen, bad things are going to happen, crime's going to go up, that sort of thing, because they'd heard about, you know, gangs and things like that in other cities. And when the Karen first came, there had been a problem with some vandalism, and the superintendent told me, the previous superintendent told me, said, I knew that that the vandalism wasn't being caused by the new Americans, and he explained why, and sure enough, a lot of it had been caused by some white kids, and the parents, you know, were saying, well, that can possibly be my kid, they're too good to do that sort of thing, but it was. And then there finally came a time when some of the Karen kids did get in trouble. They vandalized some cars. And immediately the parents of those kids they wrote an article in the local newspaper. And they essentially said, those are our kids. They did it. It was their fault. We own that. They have embarrassed us. You have given us a place to live. You have given us a piece of America, jobs to have. We own this problem. They're our kids, and we're going to take care of it. And the superintendent said at that point it was game, set, and match. The community realized these are wonderful, hardworking people who are contributing a lot to the community, and there's nothing but good things to say about it. So that's a remarkable story. The question is the model exportable to other communities in rural America that are seeing this die-off of towns? Will they be accepting of new Americans? Really in a way that is very reminiscent of the new Americans that came in the 19th century. The adults in these immigrant communities or new American communities, they're not assimilating as quickly as the kids. They don't speak English as well. They have their own traditions. But the next generation, the young kids are, and I think it reflects the experience of whatever immigrant communities, or the Italians, the Germans, the Irish, whoever it was in the 19th century. Is it exportable to other communities here to revitalize some of these areas of rural America? Everybody I talked to said, it is, but you've got to follow the model. You've got to really provide the support mechanisms. You've got to have a community that sincerely welcomes the the new folks into the community and doesn't, is not standoffish and tries to segregate them. So we'll see if it works in other areas. Anyway, it was a tremendously powerful week there in Huron, South Dakota, of all places, to have this traditional white rural community really opening their arms to people of a different color, especially the families and the children who are willing to work hard and take part in the American experience. So that's it for this week. I'm actually parking the rig for a week in Sioux Falls tomorrow to fly home to San Diego for a family wedding. I'll be back a week from today and headed up to northern South Dakota, where I've been promised an opportunity to get into the Hutterite community, which are fairly close communities, and talk to them. They've become a very powerful social and economic influence throughout this whole region of the country. So I will be posting the next video then. As always, the best way to follow this is on the Wisdom Road Facebook group, or follow me on Twitter at Grant Lichtman, or on my website, grantlichtman.com. We'll see you in a week or so.